Check out this clip from a recent episode of Booked on Rock. Rachel Brodsky, she is the author of the upcoming book, Lessons in Lace, Everything I Know About Dreams, Heartbreak, and Magic I Learned from Stevie Nicks. What's great to see over the last, I guess, decade or so, she got into the Rock Hall as a solo artist. The attendance numbers started to go up, and she started to get this recognition even more so than before. Younger artists look up to her. But like you write in the book, she was once underestimated, misunderstood, dismissed, and mocked. And I'm still trying to figure out why that is. Why do you think so many critics initially failed to recognize her depth as an artist?
Well, I mean, part of it I think is just old-fashioned misogyny.
Right.
In the 60s and 70s, women, I mean, women have always had to fight their way to the front and women of color especially. And the kind of misogynistic uh takes on women in music have they've changed, like because they do still exist, but then I think it was a bit more blatant. So in the 60s and 70s, I mean, Stevie's basically in like a boys club, and to an extent rock has always been that way, but in at this time she is one of many fewer women trying to do this.
You think about how important Stevie and Christine McVie were
Hmm.
to Fleetwood Mac, especially as you get to the late 80s when Lindsey Buckingham exits the band, and they carried that group in terms of hit singles, keeping them in the public eye and writing solid songs.
When I say that she was underappreciated and undervalued and not really taken seriously, I'm thinking mostly of the mid 70s when she enters Fleetwood Mac. And first, when Nick Fleetwood expressed interest in bringing on Lindsey Buckingham into Fleetwood Mac, it wasn't like, hey, like, I'd like you and your singing partner Stevie Nicks to join. It was, oh, I want Lindsay.
That's
And
right.
I've read a few different takes as to who actually said, oh, but also Stevie Nicks has to come. But Stevie was sort of seen as more of an adjunct to Lindsey Buckingham's artistry. Like Lindsay was the one who got to, before they joined the Fleetwood Mac, Lindsay was the one who was sort of playing out with other bands. He was the one who was like in the studio writing, and Stevie was who was doing odd jobs like cleaning houses, wait, bussing tables, and so she literally didn't get to like matriculate the way that Lindsey Buckingham did, and so when she went to be a solo artist in the early 80s, there really was this big question mark hanging over the whole idea of her leaving Fleetwood Mac even just for like one or two album cycles. Because one thing I didn't quite realize that like now when I was growing up and now people in band singers who start in bands leave to do solo material all the time. It's just it's completely normalized and no one really thinks anything of it. But at this time, apparently it was much riskier, a lot less likely, and just a harder thing to do. And Stevie is not only wanting to go off on her own, but also she wants to launch her own record label, like in order to do it, which she does. But um Tom Petty, who's all over Belladonna, didn't really like. It seemed like he liked her as a person, but he kind of saw her and Fleetwood Mac as being more like pop radio and maybe a little less serious than Tom and in the Heartbreakers, which were like it's funny to call Tom and the Heartbreakers like punk rock, but that was but punk was kind of their philosophy and their
Sure.
mentality. Like
And
they were
that's what they were labeled.
badasses.
Yeah, they were punk rock, new wave type thing
Yeah.
when they first came out.
Yeah,
Sure.
and so Stevie had, and the last thing I'll say is I read a lot of the interviews that Stevie Nicks did and with Fleetwood Mac in the mid 70s, and these if it was a woman writing about her, then she was probably the woman writer was usually a lot more open-minded, I guess you could say, about the artist that she was meeting. But there were a few mid 70s, early 80s. Definitely, I think more so mid 70s interviews with Stevie, where like the male journalist would be looking at this person and just completely writing her off as like you're a featherhead. Like, what are you talking about with like Rhiannon and crystals and shawls and like all this mystical stuff. Like you, like I don't even want to touch this. Like you are just unserious. And that was the vibe. And this is not something that I had any idea of. And it was so fascinating to kind of go back in time in a way just by reading these old interviews and like really placing myself back at that point because I have only ever, known Stevie Nicks as being like the like rock and roll fairy godmother who inspired legions of singer-songwriters and like I've never heard a bad word about her. Like she's just like so beloved. But there was a time when she was just utterly dismissed as being like frivolous, you know?
Yeah, see that. Well, that answers it then because that is before my time as well. So by the time I'm a fan, late 80s, early 90s, by that point, she's already established herself. But in the beginning, yeah, it was a much different time, which is what that research that you did for this book reveals, which leads to the next question because you mentioned you spent a lot of time diving into archival interviews, documentaries, lyrics, books. Any surprising discoveries during your research process?
I think that was probably the biggest one, just the extent to which she was written off. Especially with like there were a few Rolling Stone reviews, not so much interviews, but reviews like of Fleetwood Mac's live shows with like in the very beginning in like 1975 when Stevie and Lindsay joined, where they just the reviewer would be watching the show and be just kind of like not really getting what Stevie is doing on stage and not really liking her voice, calling her voice kind of nasal, unappealing, and so that just seeing the critical pushback was interesting because I've never read any such thing just in my lifetime with more current media and writers. So that was probably the biggest one. I think also I really don't think I fully realized the extent to which Stevie felt like she had to separate herself artistically from Lindsay and how Lindsay was also quite dismissive of her when she went to go do her solo thing. And I don't mean to, crap talk Lindsay Buckingham. I'm a huge Lindsay Buckingham fan too. But reading more closely about their dynamic, in the beginning when they joined Fleetwood Mac and kind of seeing how, like relearning how the rest of the band kind of saw their dynamic, which they viewed as a bit controlling, meaning that Lindsay is seeming a bit controlling of Stevie, and then just sort of how she slowly kind of gained her self-confidence enough to separate herself from him and be her own planet, as it were.
Don't miss the full conversation, available wherever you listen to your podcasts.